You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dmitri Vietze. I'm the founder and CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors. We are a PR firm that specializes in music technology. I'm also the founder of the Music Tectonics Conference, which takes place October 27th and 28th, 2020 in Los Angeles. That'll be our second annual conference, hoping that we are at the right time for humans to get back together, for innovators to come together to talk about where we should go in the music space. And we are doing a kind of a flash mini-series on the Music Tectonics podcast, addressing a lot of the issues that are not just coming up for self-isolation and remote work in the music space, but also the opportunities and some interesting things going on. And we've talked to a couple of folks on recent episodes about live streaming music performances, and we're going to continue that with today's conversation. Today, I've got with me the founder of Side Door, Laura Simpson. How you doing, Laura?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So I think that the best thing to do here is to jump right in and have you explain, what is Side Door?
Sure. Side Door is a platform that basically matches artists who are looking to perform a show with a host who has a space to create that show. And we basically created a really simple booking process and ticketing process so that anybody can basically create a show in their space, and we can carry them through the booking process, ticket the show, and also pay everyone out automatically online. So basically, if you want to bring your favorite local artist into your community space to do a show and you can promote the show, we can help you do that.
Awesome. We'll get into a little bit of the flow of what that means, what that looks like for both hosts and performers. But first, why don't you tell us why you started it?
Well, I worked with artists for a really long time. Most recently, as a funding program officer in Canada, there's a lot of funding available for artists, fortunately. And I was intimately involved in navigating the difficulties for touring artists, especially in exporting their music in different markets in Europe and in North America. And one of the things that was always a challenge was to book shows. And it was becoming increasingly the only way to earn revenue, especially for emerging and mid level artists, because recordings weren't generating any revenue anymore. So it was apparent to me that when I was doing something on the side, which was hosting shows at my own house, uh, it was incredibly low overhead and high return on investment for the artist, but also return on experience for the audience. Those shows were really intimate, and it was really my favorite thing to do was put these shows on the side. And so I wanted to combine those two things: the difficulty of finding good shows and the ability for the audience to experience something like that, so intimate and interactive with the artist. And it's not like we invented house concerts, but when I hooked up with my co-founder Dan Mangan, who's an artist here in Canada, he had faced a similar problem as an artist, of course, and he had started his career doing house concerts and building his audience that way. And to us, it wasn't a matter of we were able to do that because we had access. We thought we could create a technical solution in order to connect people and guide them through the process so that anybody could do it. And so that was the platform that we built with Side Door.
Let's talk about that. I mean, this is so cool because, we talk a lot about the monetization of music and so forth. And I love that you started from at least halfway from the experience, the community building experience, as well as thinking about how to fill the gaps on the revenue side of things. But how does Side Door work for hosts? Let's say I've got a barn where I host weddings or something like that, and I want to start doing concerts. What is my experience coming on to Side Door?
So we're really looking for people rather than places first and foremost, because what we found is that we're connecting people to create relationships. And so sometimes people say, oh, my space isn't good enough. But really, if the host is the one who's really energetic and willing to put some effort into the show, that's what makes the show great. So we were triaging hosts as they were entering based on some questions of what they were looking to do, basically saying, are you willing to help promote the show, and are you responsible for the space that you're going to put up for the show? And if they got cleared through that, and sometimes they had some questions, and we have a great community support team that helps them through that. They could basically get on there and list their space for any artists who are looking for a space, and so they could interact with the artist. And not only are they saying what kind of space they have, they're saying what they want. So maybe people just want acoustic performances. Maybe they only want certain kinds of genres. So they really can be specific about what kind of performance they're looking for.
I'm curious what their experiences in terms of selecting performers. Are they getting submissions through the site? Are they then getting emails and then they just pick? How does that part of it work?
So we have sort of a two-tier system right now. One is that artists can go in and so there's sort of like a passive way that hosts can receive invitations from artists. They get a weekly digest of artists that have matched with them. And so these are artists who have found these spaces on our platform and have requested with a message a little bit about themselves and why they would like to play that space. And they can respond or not. Sometimes people respond and they keep them in their connections, but maybe they can't do a show right then and there. But at least we're connecting the relationship. They can also actively go and search. So we're now moving more towards a tag based system. So both the host and the artist can start to bring in more and more information about themselves, and people can search based on those tags. So you think about sort of the way that real estate sites are working these days. Airbnb is working the similar way. It's a similar approach that we're taking for matchmaking. And we're starting to look at more of the internal ways that we can push good matches together. So we have some really great intel, for instance, on, these spaces or these areas are looking for more of this kind of music. So we'll actually start to push that kind of music or that kind of performance in those directions. So there's a lot sort of working under the hood here in order to push the best case scenarios together in order to create those great matches.
So you've got hosts creating kind of a profile describing what their space is like, their capacity, what kind of music they're looking for, and then performers can start to submit proposals or invite to connect, that sort of thing. What else is the performer doing inside Door to start to get these gigs?
Sidedoor also has a schedule builder. So they basically say, if they're going on tour, a lot of artists start by saying they need fill dates. So they might have a few anchor dates um, booked here and there, but they have spaces in between. And so one of the biggest difficulties for artists is to get from A to B in, not a 18-hour drive, and hopefully stopping along the way and getting gigs along the way. So we're trying to fill those gaps in a lot of ways. Sometimes people are doing full tours. And in order to plan that out, we have a schedule builder where they can say, this is where I'm going to be. And these are the kind of spaces I'm looking for. And as they plot that on a map, that pushes them to the top of the match findings for the hosts in those areas. And so these artists are saying, their profiles are showing up. They're saying when they're available to play. And then the host can see right away who's passing through their town.
Wow. So is there actually a visual map that they're kind of putting pins on that ranks them higher like that?
That's right. Yeah. And that's sort of where our logo comes from, is the idea of pins on the map, connecting those dots together. And so, yeah, they can physically map that out. In the future, we're really working towards tour building through the map feature first and foremost, so that they can really visualize what it's going to look like.
Wow, this is really cool because we've been doing PR for artists for 20 years, literally, and the tour thing, to watch their tours unfold and to see how painful it can be to have some great anchor dates that are in Canada and the U.S. If we have any European listeners, man, there's big countries. There's a lot of territory to cover, and it's really cool to think about this as filling dates. It makes me wonder, do booking agents use Side Door to fill in dates as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things that we didn't necessarily expect because, in a way, we are filling a gap if an artist doesn't have a booking agent. But what we found really early on is that booking agents have the same problem. They need to fill dates. And so when we work the split, basically that's part of the booking process. You figure out what the split is going to be on the show for the ticket revenue. We basically are putting it towards the artist, and whether or not an artist has a band to pay or a booking agent to pay or whatever, they're dealing with that split on their own. So it really is going to apply to any artist in whatever their team situation is. But yeah, we've had a bunch of booking agents not only come in and use the platform, because you can have as many authorized users on your profile as needed, so you can have your whole team in on there. But also, we've had such interest from agencies that we actually have three agents and agencies in as investors and advisors for our company now.
Oh, that's cool. That makes total sense. And if an agent comes in, are they coming and sort of cloning an artist profile? Are they acting as if they're the artist, or do you have a way for an agent to have multiple artists and then let the agent kind of sort out the splitting with the artist of their own fees, their own commission?
Yeah, the artists, I mean, they can set up, the banking info can be whatever it needs to be per artist. The agent can be the main administrator of all those profiles and have it all just go to one account. For example, we just did a project with South by Southwest where we had one agent managing six different artists, and so that's what she did. She had basically all of those profiles linked to the booking agent's account, and then she would funnel the money in that way. So it's basically according to whatever the team deems is okay for them.
That's really cool. Who are the most common performers on Side Door to date? Are there certain genres or demographics or regions that have done especially well? I mean, I know you're in Halifax, right? You're in Nova Scotia, so I don't know if there's some regional stuff from your background, or I know a lot of times platforms like this, you get some kind of organic growth without even knowing why or where originally.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, when we started, and yeah, we are kind of in the middle of nowhere in terms of the touring world because you don't pass through Halifax. So we actually focused right away on the tour routes that were in demand for artists, because our mission is really first and foremost to serve artists, because our deep belief is that artists are undervalued and underserved, and we're in the state of mind that if you serve the artists and you support them as much as you can, they can be the best they can be and attract the audiences that they need to attract. So by us focusing on the needs that they had in terms of tour routes, um, that really helped us develop, for instance, the Ontario sort of around there. And then we sort of worked on in and around the East Coast of the US. And then when we worked with South by, we had from people were touring from their hometowns down to Austin. So we started to carve out all these routes through the US. And that's our goal, is to really start, finding these paths that aren't necessarily the typical straight through the major city paths, because what we're finding, which is delightful, is that people are starting to veer off on the secondary roads into these other markets that have not been touched. And it's only because there weren't spaces there. Nobody was there putting their hand up saying, I've got a place to play. And now we have some of our greatest shows and sellouts happening in these tiny little towns because they're starved for the cultural input from these touring artists.
Yeah, that's super cool. So, taking away the whole idea about the booking agents, what's the usual monetization model on Side Door? What are the splits?
So we set the split for side door as 10%, which is the typical booking agent commission. Uh, Off the gross, the ticket gross, we're actually paying Stripe in order to use their Stripe Connect program. That basically is, like having a PayPal account. It's the same thing. You have an account with Stripe via Side Door, and your bank account is hooked up. And so that your split is actually held in escrow until the show happens and then deposited directly into your account. So Side door takes 10% after the Stripe fees are taken out. And then the artist and the host actually can negotiate what they would like to split the remaining 90% to be. And we don't allow the host to actually go above 40% so that the artist can always earn at least 50%. And typically, because of the kinds of spaces that we have, the host is either taking nothing or around 10%.
So that's a pretty nice deal on the artist side compared to percentages in traditional concert marketplaces.
Yeah, I would say the average take home for the artist with us, pre isolation times, was around $400 to $500.
Oh, that's cool. And are these typically solo, duo, trio, or does it get into full bands?
We have mainly, stripped down versions of whatever band you can imagine of, but it's been so it's like singer songwriters, but we've had a lot of indie rock. We did a huge push on hip hop because we know that it's a super underserved market for finding venues for hip hop. In fact, one of the hip hop artists that we had playing at our shows in Ontario ended up going on to win the Polaris Prize in Canada later that year. So we were really
That's awesome.
happy to be working with some super high quality artists. Yeah. And like DJs were in demand. And so we did a call out for DJs, and we had a pile of DJs come on. And then we also have been really focusing on, like more niche art, like music that maybe can't be discovered in every case, but it's sort of like, um, I had like immigrant association folks call me up and say, "Hey, we're looking to help these immigrants who are just freshly moved to Canada, settle in and finding cultural, you know, things to do that reminds them of home is really helpful for them to settle in." So we were matching,
That's cool.
immigrants with music from home. Yeah, so there's some real opportunity even with some of the more niche kinds of art that's coming out.
So let's talk a little bit more about some numbers around traction pre COVID-19, pre isolation. Do you have any metrics about your success before the world became a crisis here? Just curious how this model is doing.
Yeah, we had, well, we still have about 2,300 artists signed up, and about 750 spaces all over North America, mainly, some in Europe as well. We haven't really activated our European touring circuits yet. They're more in sort of the wait and see mode, but we do have a representative working over there in Amsterdam, actually. And in terms of shows, we had booked north of 700 shows. So our 1.0 launch was in end of February last year. So just beginning of March 2019. And then, so most of our traction we've achieved since then. And then we're just releasing our 2.0 at the beginning of this year in 2020, tightening up some of the gaps that we had seen and trying to increase the speed in which people can get on board and start booking and finding good matches. And that has resulted in some great success before everything sort of went downhill. March and April were our top booking months. We had upwards of 55 shows booked per month all over North America. So it was really gratifying to see the response that people were, using it in the way that worked for them. Shows on your own terms is sort of a tagline that we had, and so we were really grateful that we could be responsive to the needs of the users and sort of build it the way that they needed to have it.
So you said that artists could typically make anywhere from $400 to $500 on a show. Were there any artists? I mean, I know you've been in business for a year, been open for a year now, and then we've got this thing we're going to talk about that's going on in the world right now. But prior to this, were there artists that were like making five figures or more from Side Door yet?
It wasn't really typically, I wouldn't say possible, but it was more because our venue sizes were between 40 and 50 cap. We were increasingly getting more community spaces, so more like 150 to 200 cap. So we were seeing, the biggest revenues we were seeing were, $3,000 $4,000 for some of the bigger artists that we were signing on. But I would say that pre-COVID-19, getting some of the A-lister artists to sort of test out our platform without us having a whole bunch of traction on like which hosts were the best and that sort of thing was a little more difficult. We did have a booking manager who was working hand in hand with some of our top tier artists to specifically look for the best hosts. And so often we have this group of our hosts who he would often just go to say, you guys are the best hosts. You've been hosting the most. We know the reviews of your houses or your spaces have been the greatest. You get first pick on these great artists. So that's sort of how we were working it. But yeah, things have been changing. It's been interesting now that everybody's stuck at home.
Yeah, I was actually curious, not about per show, but across multiple shows, if artists were starting to make this a significant part of their income.
So pre-COVID, I mean, it's like touring revenue is definitely one of the major ways of earning cash for most artists. It's just, earning from publishing deals or, sync licensing and that sort of thing is still such a small percentage of artists who can capitalize on that. Um, Post COVID, it is incredible to me how the last thing that artists have, which is playing live, is being given away for free by donation. And I don't disagree with that. I just think that it is an inherently faulty system that is going to lead to burnout, and it devalues the incredible talent that these artists have. And that's why we actually moved in the direction of gating and ticketing these live performances.
So let's talk about this for a minute. So let's just start fresh. What has happened since the self isolations have kicked in terms of what you're doing at Side Door?
Yeah. So we, like I said, had a partnership with South by Southwest, and that resulted as soon as that cancellation happened on that, unforgiving Friday the 13th when everything went downhill for everybody. Um, South by canceled. We ended up canceling, I think, 23 shows that within 2 hours of that cancellation. Um, and then a further, 75% of our shows basically for March were wiped out, and then everything for the spring and into the summer. So dozens and dozens and dozens of shows. My co-founder Dan, who is a touring artist himself, he tours all over the world. He had sold out shows all over Canada, into the US, and he canceled all of his spring dates into the summer festivals. Probably lost more than $100,000 of bookings. And it was, we were devastated. It was like a week of fetal position, to be honest. And just trying to sort out our lives. We both have young kids and just trying to figure out what we're doing with our families and that sort of thing. And then literally a week after that cancellation, rush was, Dan came out and did a live show that we gated through Side Door, sold tickets to for $6. And he decided to call it Weekly Side Door. And he got on, and we had sold 200 tickets to the first one. And he's like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this every week. We're going to give all the funds to charity every week. And we're going to do this until we're allowed to see each other again. And so the first one was kind of hilarious because we're still figuring out the technology. We're using Zoom as our means to do the live stream, but we're working at the ways to make that better. And um, by the end of it, the community that was watching had all had their videos on. So you could go through this gallery, page after page, of people with their videos on, watching with their kids, watching with their spouses, singing along, holding hands. Maybe they were folding laundry, they were cooking, and something really amazing happened to me, especially, where I was like, oh, there is absolutely a way you can connect over this medium. It doesn't have to be this broadcast into the ether sort of thing. These people are showing up, they're staying for the entire time. They've made it an event in their schedule. They are participating, they are sharing things with each other. They were so into sharing things with each other that they asked us to create a separate group to continue the chat. So we created a channel for they could chat between shows. People joined, in the hundreds after that. The next week, we did another one. 677 tickets sold. Again, and this is so we were like, we have something here. Started talking to Zoom. Zoom is interested in helping us integrate to create a better music listening experience. We're working on the security elements of that to ensure that people are getting into an online room and they feel safe, and there's some rules of engagement. And we're sort of working on, how do you create the best energy exchange in an online environment possible. And there's two things happening for the artist here, which is really important. One is they can see their audience. It's really, really important. And I think people take it for granted. But if when you can see your audience and they have their videos on and they're singing along and holding up pictures and playing along with their guitars, like everybody has their mics muted, right? But you can see them react to what you're doing. And part of art is giving and then receiving. The other thing is that for the artists is that they're not asking for money constantly throughout this show. They're concentrating on the performance. They know that those people have paid to be there. They just can deliver a really great performance. They know those people are just going to stay and listen. They're not going to passively come in and out. And so that was something that we thought, okay, let's work on that and create that for everybody. And now, as I mentioned, it was a little bit harder to get top tier artists before this. Now we have people coming out of the woodwork because they're all at home and they've got nothing to do. So they're like, of course, starting to burn out from doing the live streams. Of course, they're starting to get weary of asking for donations. And we think we really have something of value for both the artists and the audience here. And our goal is to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these shows so that the audience will shortly have an audience sign in for our platform. So the audience can go in and say, what do I want to see tonight? Who do I want to be a part of their lives for this evening or whatever, like that? What kind of genres am I into, that sort of thing? And from the artist's point of view, they get to connect directly with their audience and continue to connect directly with their audience. So our goal through this whole thing is to make relationships super, super tight so that by the time we get out of this and they can do an in-person show, it feels like a family reunion.
That's really, really awesome. It's very cool to hear about your pivot, partly because since you had a more traditional venue in-person model versus a lot of the live streaming companies have a digital model first, you're thinking about the values of the relationship a little bit differently. I mean, the other live streaming platforms are very interested in social interaction, but what you said about actually visually, seeing the audience visually, not just seeing their chats, and also that it's a ticketed event. You've already got a committed audience versus people who are sort of like, well, you can engage with these kind of tips or these emojis or even subscriptions, but you're deciding after the fact. It's two different approaches, and we've done a few different interviews about live streaming, but this is the first one that's really explained what that could be like. And it's one thing we have talked about on the podcast recently is how this forcing of self-isolation is changing what people are willing and interested to do. Once you start to cut out certain options, other options become more valuable and more appreciated. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out over time on both types of platforms, especially once the isolations are lifted. I'm assuming that's going to happen, guys. You know, I'm an optimist here, but I have a question for you. You mentioned that Dan did a concert, then then you mentioned the second concert. Was the second concert that sold 677 tickets Dan? And what are you doing now? Are these just him, or how are other artists engaging and being enlisted on this stuff?
Yeah, so Dan is the guinea pig as the co-founder, and it's been great because we get to work at the kinks, and he actually has a tutorial up on our website now to help folks navigate the best exact settings for using Zoom in particular to create a good sound and a good engagement. We also have our booking manager. He does a lot of live streams anyway on the side. He has a whole thing about how you can work on your performance and all that sort of thing. So we're really working towards education in terms of the quality of the show. And so when we started doing that, and plus we did some slight adjustments on our ticketing and some of the show booking aspects, so that we were basically manually hacking our own platform to allow artists to book these. And we basically replaced the hosts with dummy side door hosts that were in different time zones, so that we could initiate these show bookings as much through the initial means that we had. So within from that doomsday Friday the 13th to approximately 2 weeks later, we had adjusted our platform enough that people could sign up and create a show with the assistance of our staff within 5 minutes. And so, what we are working towards now is that by the end of the next 3 week period, somebody can sign up and do this all on their own in a few minutes and not need to have a host. Now, having said that, yeah, fake hosts. So now, having said that, we are still encouraging the hosts who are kind of sitting on their hands right now to act as curators and promoters still. So I myself, I'm still a host. I've been hosting for 11 years now. And so what I've been doing is going in and grabbing artists that I love, and I've been looking for different ways to engage them rather than performances. So one of the artists that I've worked with in the past wanted to do a talk and a Q&A on Transgender Day of Visibility on March 31st. And so we did that. And, that was something that was probably not going to happen in person, because the audience that we got could show up or, and keep their video off if they wanted, but listen privately to something that was extremely important to them. And this artist could show a completely different side of them and be very vulnerable with them in a way that they couldn't necessarily do in person that was comfortable for them. So I've been working on some of those kinds of engagements between hosts and artists so that we can offer some really outside the box engagements. So now we have artists signing up to do all sorts of things. We have in the works a drummer from a really great band going to do a drum workshop. We have a quite famous actor who I can't mention yet because it's not confirmed, but about to be confirmed, doing readings, like doing sort of like different play readings and that sort of thing. So we have artists who I am diehard fans of writing into our support channel asking to do shows. And I'm sort of in this position of like, oh my God, it's really happening. People are responding to what we're doing, and it's meaningful and it's needed. And so right now we're just all hands on deck trying to make these experiences really great.
That is so cool, Laura. Congratulations on being able to pivot so quickly. We're seeing a lot of amazing stuff happening in the music tech space right now, where either a company that has a model that is relevant to remote work is or live streaming is all of a sudden seeing a renaissance, or they were ahead of the market and now the market's catching up out of necessity, or like you have another type of in real life type model and are coming up with what does it mean when concerts switch to having to be done remotely. So it's really cool to see how that's evolving. Sometimes, it makes me hopeful, because sometimes it's those moments in time of crisis or significant challenges where it challenges your assumptions, and then as a result, you get to try something new. It becomes a bit of a laboratory, and those laboratories build great opportunities for innovation. So if somebody wants to try to host a concert, a ticketed concert via side door and the Zoom connection, what should they do now?
So you can basically just go and you can either just write to us directly and we'll get you started, or you can just sign up and create an artist profile. And there is now an option where you can select an online show, and it will just guide you through that process in creating an online show. We're not completely shutting out the other ways of live streaming. We're going to make it available to ticket your show through other platforms. We're basically still in the experiment phase, as you mentioned, the MVP phase of this new adaptation. And so we really want to basically work as much as possible with the artist directly to ensure that they're going to create an experience that's really great from their side, but also from the audience side as well. So you can, if you have an idea, or if you want to start experimenting with the idea of, in some cases, people are just putting up an RSVP in order to get it into somebody's calendar. It's a reminder. It's another way of advertising their live stream. So it's we become an aggregate of all the live streams available. But also, if you want to try the ticketed show, that's what we're really pushing for right now, is to really test your audience a little bit. This is the Wild West right now. Just like, see what value you can bring to an audience that's going to be dedicated to be there. And I promise you, it will feel a little scary at first, but the return on that engagement is so great right now. It's honestly, it's like you said, it's the thing that's giving me hope.
It's super awesome. I'm excited. It makes me want to be a host of live shows, or in person or online, be a curator or something. It's so cool to create that opportunity for people to get involved. It reminds me, we've got a guy here in Bloomington, Indiana, where we're based, who built a tiny concert car. It's a tiny house that's on the back of a truck. And we actually hosted a concert there in our driveway one day. And I was like, oh, wow, we could book shows through Side Door for that down the road. Would be cool. Better yet, it's funny because you talked about having people fill in their tour dates with Side Door. Well, the cool thing with the tiny concert car is that it can come to you, which flips it on its head a whole other way. Anyway, this has been super fun, Laura. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast and sharing not only what Side Door was meant to do, but what you're doing right now. And it's great to see innovators like you who are connected to a community, who are really interested in the art as well as the livelihood of all the parties involved, and figure out what to do now. So thanks so much for joining us on Music Tectonics, Laura. I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Dmitri. It was great talking to you.
And thank you for listening to Music Tectonics. This was fun, finding out how another innovator is pivoting with the COVID-19 crisis. I know, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and some of you are going to be annoyed with that, but this is what I'm trying to do, is to help everybody in the music tech community think about what are the possibilities right now. And so it was so great to have Laura from Side Door here. You can find them at sidedooraccess.com. That's the website, sidedooraccess.com. Please hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app so we can keep you posted of other innovations that we're finding in the music space right now. And go to musictectonics.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter and get posted not only about additional podcasts, but weekly Webs Day every Wednesday in April at 12 p.m. Eastern. We're doing online meetups. We did one on live streaming. We're doing one on remote collaboration. And we're looking for your ideas at #WebsDay for what other topics and speakers we can bring in to kick off those meetups. And if we can keep the Zoom bombers away, we're going to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves and shout out. Thanks. Keep listening to Music Tectonics.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.